Hack attacks on businesses big and small are on the rise. Let's turn to the Senior Vice President for Cyberspace and National Security Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Chris Roberti, joining us now. And I read a report that phishing emails are the #1 way that cyber criminals are breaking into businesses. What can you tell us about cyber threats?
Well, yes, and it's true that a high percentage of cyber attacks come in through a spear phishing attack, like you said, through an email with an embedded link or a text. And what that really does is it should let us know that the threat's real, the threat's persistent, and the threat's sophisticated, and that companies need to acknowledge that and then take steps to protect themselves, which they can very easily do.
What are some safety steps?
Well, the first thing that companies should do, as I mentioned, is acknowledge that there's a problem, recognize that anonymity is not a defense. Anybody can be targeted, whether you're a large company or a small company. So that in order to some concrete steps is that companies should ensure that they are enabling multi-factor authentication in their system, so that not just a password, but a password plus something else will allow access. They should be training their employees on how to spot those malicious emails or texts and not click on those links. They should be backing up their data and encrypting it to prevent unauthorized access to it. They should be building relationships with their local FBI or Department of Homeland Security, cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency offices. And they should have a plan. Think about how they would react if something happened. And of course, they should be updating their systems and installing patches as soon as those things are available.
What's being done about this big problem?
There's a lot being done. And in fact, the private sector is really part of the solution. There are some fantastic, very sophisticated companies working both independently for their clients, but also with the government to identify major cyber attacks, brewing cyber attacks, helping defend companies against those attacks. And then, of course, working on the remediation side. And then the government's role, they have very sophisticated authorities and capabilities to, when appropriate, take the fight back to the adversary.
What would you say are the most persistent cyber threats for businesses?
So there's two that I'll highlight today. The first are ransomware attacks, which is a cyber attack coupled with a demand for payment. Those attacks can be very debilitating. They can stop companies from operating. And in many cases, it takes up to 280 days to fully recover from those attacks. Second one I'll mention is business email compromise, is where the attacker gets inside your system, observes, and then will create a fraudulent payment attempt, whether that's to a false vendor or other entity. And business email compromises alone in 2021 were cost over $2 billion. So those are significant threats. On the where to go for information, you can go to uschamber.com/security, and there's a link for cybersecurity where we've got tips and best practices. You can also go to CISA.gov, that's CISA.gov, that's within the Department of Homeland Security. There's lots of information there as well.
Thank you, Chris, for all of this great information.
Thanks, Angie.
Go to businessfirstam.com for where to see our show on TV.